Hi everyone, and welcome to a new year of physics. For those of you that haven't had me before, this is Mrs. Hutchinson, and many of you probably know me by my maiden name, Chapa. It's a much cooler name, and I understand that is probably what you would like to call me. So as long as you call me something appropriate, whether it's Hutchinson, Chapa, Chapa the Hutch, doesn't really matter to me. That works. So those of you that have had me before, this syllabus is almost identical to the Regents chemistry syllabus. However, it's really good to refresh on what the classroom policies are going to be, so I want you to really listen up. And those of you that are new, welcome. I can't wait to start this year with you, and I look forward to having a wonderful year of physics. So really, what is physics? It's a collection of ideas that's used to organize and explain what we observe and predict what might actually happen in the world around us. It's a very practical science because every single day we see physics in action. For example, walking on the street as opposed to walking in the air is physics. Gravity, you may have heard of it. So it's one of those sciences where you can actually see the applications of it, which is kind of nice, as opposed to chemistry where you kind of have to take my word for it and say, hey, these tiny little atoms are actually doing things. This one, you can actually visually see what's going on in terms of the labs. Now, this course is based on the New York State Regents syllabus for physics, and as you probably have noticed throughout your high school career, many science courses are actually largely in laboratory work, which is good, and we have quite a bit of fun in terms of our labs for this year in physics. Materials are the same as to what they were last year for chemistry. You'll need a 3-ring binder, lots of notes, always, an agenda or a calendar, or of course your cell phone to put your homework assignments in, whatever works for you, pen or pencil always. And the only difference between physics and chemistry would be in physics, on the Regents exam, you're allowed to use either a scientific or a graphing calculator. Now, the graphing calculator that you're allowed to use would be like a TI-83, not a TI-89. So, in terms of your graphing calculator, make sure that you choose wisely. If you have a question about that calculator, just go ahead and ask me, and I'll let you know if that's something that you can eventually use on the Regents exam. However, I strongly suggest that you utilize the calculator that we're going to be using on the Regents exam throughout the entire year. That way you're used to it for all the calculations we're going to be doing. Graphing calculators are, like I said, they're permitted, but you have to have your memory cleared before the test, which is one of those things that you all know how to do, that you actually probably remind me how to do when it comes to the Regents time. Also, I don't have any graphing calculators to loan you. The only ones that I have are scientific calculators. So if you want to practice with your graphing calculator, you're going to need to bring that on your own. You'll also need a calculator every single day because physics is basically science with a lot of math in it. So make sure that you bring your calculator every day. Make sure your name is on it so you don't lose that calculator, or if you happen to leave it in my room, I know whose it is. And then last but not least, your review book typically costs between $10 and $12. We're going to get it this year, and unlike in chemistry, it will absolutely be required for you to do work in. Of course, if it's something that is too much trouble for your family, we can always work out ways for you to get a new review book. So don't worry about that, but that comes in February. Textbook. As you know, with chemistry, I didn't really hand out a textbook. However, in physics, same idea. If you want a textbook, though, I can give you one, but I found that the wording tends to be a little trickier than what it really needs to be for our course. But if you want one, you can come and ask me for one. Grading, same policy as chemistry. Exams and projects are 35%, labs are 30%, quizzes 25%, and homework is 10%. Homework works the same way. I just check it for completion, and then we go over it. So, same idea. Of course, to obtain Regents credit for this course, you have to have at least a 65 for the end grade for this course. That includes both your midterm and your final. Late work, You know I don't do well with late work if you've had me before, so don't be late. Make sure your work is on time. Tests or quizzes not taken more than 2 days after an absence will be zeros in the grade book. I'm definitely going to be a stickler for that because people try and take advantage of certain situations. So if you happen to miss a test or a quiz, you're going to want to take it the day you get back. Late homework is never going to be accepted because it's discussed in class on the day that it is due. So that would be silly because you could just sit there and do the homework as I'm going over it. Labs handed in late, as you know, less than 1 week are 50% off. Less than 2 weeks but more than a week is 75% off, and more than 2 weeks late you get no credit in the grade book. And of course I'm going to go over labs shortly. Extra credit, in case you didn't know, extra credit is not offered in physics. Reason being, because I expect you to do the work before you take the exam. What that basically means is you're going home and you're studying just a little bit every single day. That way you won't have a reason to come up to me and say, hey, is there any extra credit? And then I'm going to say, did you study beforehand? Well, I forgot. So just make sure that you study prior to any test or quiz. Of course, quizzes are mainly pop quizzes, in case you're wondering, yet again. So make sure that you study. No extra credit will be offered. Lab policy. Let me just go over this. Of course, you guys know the lab policy. You know that New York State requires a minimum of 1,200 minutes of lab work. What that equates to is 30 labs that are 40 minutes each. I typically do somewhere between 50 and 60 labs, so you get quite a few opportunities to get your 30 labs in. If you have less than 1,200 minutes of lab time when it comes to Regents exam time, you will not be allowed to take the Regents exam at all and will not receive Regents credit for this course. Now again, the labs will never leave the room once they're turned in and graded. They'll be kept in a file in the classroom. You'll have access to that particular file, but you're not going to be allowed to take any of the graded labs out of the classroom. But you guys already know that. Lab reports, they have to be handed in 1 week after the completion of the lab. This means that the lab must be handed in at the beginning of class 1 week after the lab is completed. In other words, if we did a lab on a Wednesday, the following Wednesday, within the first 5 minutes of class, that's when that lab is due. If you hand it in the 6th minute of class, that lab is considered late and will result in a 50% deduction. I want you to listen to that carefully. The lab will be due within the first 5 minutes of the class. The 6th minute, you've already lost half credit. So please, please, please make sure that you hand it in on time. A lab that is less than 1 week late will also receive a 50% deduction. So, in other words, if you were going to earn a 100 on that lab, the grade in the grade book would now be a 50. If you then hand it in less than 2 weeks but more than a week late, you'll have a 75% deduction, and anything more than 2 weeks will get no credit. The issue with this is even though you get no credit in the grade book, you get a 0, after 2 weeks, you still have to hand the lab in to receive the lab minutes to be counted towards your Regents lab minute requirements. In other words, you will still have to hand the lab in. Therefore, just hand it in on time, and you'll actually get the most credit for it. It's kind of nice. Seems pretty simple. In order for labs to count for Regents credit, you have to receive a 65 or better on every lab. If you have a failing lab, you'll have to correct the lab and turn it in within 1 week of getting that lab passed back. It's kind of important because you want your lab credits so you can sit and take the Regents exam. If you lose your lab, you have to redo the entire lab procedure and the questions and the calculations. Copying a lab partner's data and answers, not allowed. Of course, giving your lab to someone so that they can copy it will result in not only you getting a 0, but that person who copied it getting a 0 when that lab is turned in. So don't copy, do your own work, be responsible. You already know that. I shouldn't have to repeat that. As this is a higher level science, it requires a higher level quality of writing. So for lab reports, make sure that you are utilizing correct grammar and spelling. None of this text messaging abbreviations. If I see that, I deduct quite a few points. Complete sentences, unless I explicitly tell you otherwise. And your labs have to be written in blue or black ink. Pencil is acceptable for graphing portions or table portions on the lab report. If your lab report contains a significant amount of discrepancies regarding these 3 bullets that we just discussed, significant deductions will result on your lab report. So please make sure that you are reading it and you're not just filling it out haphazardly. We also do more formal reports in physics, so just be aware that we will be typing up some labs. They're actually really a lot of fun. So for formal reports, I would just, because they take longer, I would advise you to start it as early as you can. Lab rules, you guys know all of the lab rules. Some of the labs in this course can be dangerous because of things flying across the room. It happens to be physics. So lab safety, as you know, is my number 1 priority. You have to follow all of the rules before the start of each lab. Please make sure that you're listening to me when I'm discussing the directions. Each lab is different, but there are some basic rules. No food allowed in the room because it is also a chemistry room. There were chemicals in there. I don't want you ingesting any kind of chemicals. No food whatsoever. Inappropriate behavior will not be tolerated, so throwing equipment, unless of course that happens to be the lab where we're launching things. Not listening to directions, although it's not that dangerous in terms of mixing chemicals like it was for chemistry. However, in this particular instance, if you don't listen appropriately, you may have certain items get launched a little farther than they were intended and could hurt someone if we're not being appropriate with them. Inappropriate lab behavior will result in the following. So we've got our first offense. You'll just be asked to leave that particular lab, come back for lunch detention and make it up. Second offense, you'll be asked to leave the lab. I'll call your parents and you'll have a lunch detention. Third offense is when we go and we get the principal involved. Of course, Mrs. Hawk is not here anymore, but we're going to get the principal involved and see what he or she wants us to do. So please don't make me go that far. I know you guys are good kids. We're just going to have a good year. We're going to follow all safety rules. Here's our course outline. It looks pretty stinking awesome. It really is. I gotta be honest. It's a lot of fun. We do a lot of math for the first half of the year from Unit 1 to Unit 6. And then from Unit 7 to Unit 12, it's kind of a little less math-y. But it'll be quite fun. We'll have a good year, promise. Academic honesty. Who knew that you had to be honest academically? But I did. So I expect any work that's submitted to me by you, said particular student, that it happens to be your own. I do encourage you to work together in study groups and in lab partners, but it doesn't mean that blatant copying is actually allowed, especially for lab reports. It's your responsibility to be sure that you know the difference between copying and working together. If you have any questions on a particular assignment, ask me before you turn it in. The penalty for handing in work that is not your own, well, you'll receive a 0 on that assignment. I'll definitely call your parent or guardian. And not only will you get a note in my file, but you'll get a note in the file throughout the entire school so other teachers know of what may have happened in my course. So please, please, please don't put me in that position. Don't put yourself in that position. Just do your own work. I understand that things get a little tricky at times, but just come and talk to me and maybe we can work something out. So I'm a firm believer in the adage, you only hurt yourself. And I realize that you don't understand, some of you may not understand the meaning of this. But by cheating, by copying, you're not only damaging your own reputation and character, but it may come back to haunt you in ways you never anticipated. So just do your own work, earn your own grades, and we'll be all set. Attendance for this class is extremely important. We do a lot of work every single day. So when you miss a day, you're getting farther and farther and farther behind. So please make sure that unless you're sick or you have a doctor's appointment, and I understand that those come up, but please try and make it to as many classes as you possibly can. So if you miss important announcements like a test or quiz dates, due dates for lab reports, and homework assignments, that is your responsibility to make those up. So please make sure that when you're absent, you come and talk to me, and you take the responsibility and see what you missed. So the first bullet is very important. It is your responsibility to find out the work you missed during an absence and to make it up in a timely fashion. I am not going to chase you around. This is physics. You should be responsible enough to come and talk to me to see what you missed. So it is your responsibility. If you are absent from a lab period, you must make arrangements to make up the time that you missed after school or during a lunch period or whenever. So please make sure that you make arrangements with me. I should not have to remind you. If you are absent on the day of a test or a quiz, you should be prepared to take that test or quiz on the first day that you return from your absence. In most cases, it should be made up no later than 2 days after you return. Okay? So, if you're one of those people that frequents missing tests or quizzes, number one, I catch on. Number two, you're going to have to take it on the day that you return. So just come to school unless you're really, really, really sick when we have a test or a quiz. If homework or lab reports were due on the day you were absent, you should be prepared to hand in those assignments on the first day that you return at the beginning of the class period. No late penalty will be assessed for excused absences, which is nice. So, if you had homework due on the day you were absent, just show it to me the first day you're back. If you had a lab report due on the day you were absent, turn it in on the day you get back, or else it will be considered late. Again, turn it in within the first 5 minutes of class. If you expect to miss class for a music lesson or another school-sponsored activity, such as a field trip, please let me know before you actually miss the class. That way I can get you the material you need. And then lastly, I expect you to work within these deadlines after an absence. However, if you attempt to make alternate arrangements with me before the 2-day deadline, it's likely I will provide you an extension, only if there's good reason. However, as your total number of absences increases, the likelihood that I grant an extension decreases. Just makes sense. The more you are absent, the less likely I am to be lenient. Classroom rules, pretty simple. Respect yourself and others beyond time. Be engaged in classroom activities and follow all safety rules. Consequences, if you're not following the classroom rules, I'll give you a verbal warning. I'll tell you to stop or follow certain rules. Then I'll remove you from the classroom and ask you what's going on, and I'll give your parents or guardians a call. And then, of course, we'll get a referral. However, if your actions are very serious or they result in a violation of lab safety that I consider to be very dangerous, you may find that early levels of consequences will be bypassed. So please, please, please don't put me in that situation. Don't put yourself in that situation. Just follow all safety rules. Availability. I'm available from 7 a.m. to 4 p.m. Typically, I get to school between 7 and 7:15, so if you want to see me before school. And typically, I don't leave school until 4 o'clock. My typical schedule means that I have first and ninth period prep. I'm not really sure what it's going to be this year, but hopefully it remains the same. It's a really nice schedule, but those are definitely subject to change. I will let you know on the first day of school what my schedule is. If you need extra help, I strongly suggest that you come and see me sooner rather than later, because as you may have noticed with chemistry, things kind of piled up quickly. Same thing will happen with physics. They pile up quickly. So please make sure that you come and see me the instant that you do not understand something. I want you to take this particular sheet home and get your parents to sign it. Please make sure that they have read through the entire syllabus before they sign it, because what's going to happen, or sometimes what happens, is parents will call me and they'll say, oh, I didn't know that my child needed this, or I didn't know that this was going to be late. Well, it's right in the syllabus. Had they read it, you would have been able to know that. So please make sure that your parents read this. So you're going to need to put your name on it and sign it, and you have your parents sign it as well, and return it on the day that it is due. So that concludes our discussion on our syllabus. What you're going to work on now would be this particular article, The Importance of Physics, a Fundamental Science in Our Everyday Lives. It's actually a really cool article. It talks a little bit about what physics does to improve our life, or how physics makes our lives easier. It's super interesting, so read through it and answer this particular worksheet. What I want you to do is in 2 to 4 sentences describe the important role that the science of physics plays as described in each section of the article in your own words. Be sure to provide a specific example of how physicists and their discoveries contribute to the advancement of society in each section of the article. So you'll notice that there are big bold headings. Those are the sections that I'm talking about. And just give me 2 to 4 sentences of what each section is stating. I can't wait to enjoy this year with you, and I will see you on our next video.